High Court in Namibia has dismissed an application by LGBTIQ plus rights activists to recognize the foreign-born spouses of citizens in same-sex marriages. The court dismissed the application on the basis that it cannot overturn a judgment made by the Supreme Court. Now, that judgment, which stated that homosexuality was not recognized legally, was laid out about 20 years ago. However, the judge granted legal guardianship to children born between Namibian and foreign-born spouses in same-sex marriages. Equal Namibia have been championing the case and supporting couples. They say that the verdict was actually a positive one because the judgment slammed the judgment made in her view, which went against the Constitution and discriminating against the LGBTQI plus members. Now, the group will be appealing the decision and hope this will lead to overturning of a 20-year-old Supreme Court judgment. For more on this, we are joined by activist and co-founder of the Namibia Equal Rights Movement Civil Society Organization, Omar van Rieenen. Omar, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. Unpack, first of all, this case for us. In a nutshell, how exactly did this case come about? And it's not entirely a loss, but also not entirely a win. How did you see the judgment?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here this morning. And like you said, our community is celebrating the verdict, even though it wasn't in our ruling. We did basically win the recognition of our constitutional right. And even though this was in the High Court and not the Supreme Court, it's still very important. And with matters pertaining to this case is really about two same-sex couples who have been denied the rights that are afforded to heterosexual couples in Namibia as well. In both cases, the one is a Namibian partner and one is a foreign-born partner. All couples have entered into same-sex marriage in jurisdictions where it's allowed, so in South Africa, in Germany. But when these couples are returning back to Namibia, their foreign-born spouses aren't afforded the same immigration rights as heterosexual spouses as well. So as long as you are married lawfully to a Namibian, and if you are a foreign-born spouse, you can work, live, and study in Namibia without applying for a permit. But since the first cases that we saw that are similar like this 20 years ago till now, the Ministry of Home Affairs has targeted LGBTQ couples by basically denying their work permits and denying their permanent residency, even though they are lawfully married to Namibians. So this case comes from 2017, and it involves two same-sex couples, and basically the High Court did not rule in the favor of the same-sex couples, but the High Court did recognize that the Constitution prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, and that the Supreme Court verdict 20 years ago finding that such discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation is unconstitutional was wrong. So for 20 years, the government and church groups have used the Frank verdict to give a license to discriminate against LGBTQ persons. So it's high time that this Frank case is overruled, and it is the Supreme Court's obligation and duty to undo the harms that they have caused by ruling in favor of the government in such a wrong manner, to overturn this verdict and liberate LGBTQ persons who continue to be discriminated against in Namibia.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that, the Constitution prohibits the discrimination of those in same-sex marriages, and it should even be same-sex relationships. This Fran case that was, judged upon 20 years ago, it wasn't a marriage between same-sex couples, however, but still, if that is the judgment that the judge who had her hands tied by, it seems like that the discrimination is still there, though.
No, very much so. So 20 years ago, this case was made on what's called a value judgment approach. So the Supreme Court basically said that they are going to deny homosexual couples same and equal rights because they believe that Namibian values do not accept such relationships. But they base their evidence of this on remarks made by then President Sam Nujoma and then Minister of Home Affairs, Jerry Kanjo, homophobic remarks made in public by them. But Namibian values aren't determined by by public office bearers who at that time were leaders in a male-dominated institution, Parliament. And just because there was no opposition from other political parties back then to their homophobic comments, the Supreme Court decided that this is a good test of Namibian national values. But this logic and this approach has been criticized by many in the law fraternity, many in the academic spheres as well, as to why you can't determine people's constitutional rights on certain individuals' homophobic views. And what the judge in this recent High Court verdict also said was that they believe that homosexuality and LGBTQ persons are part and parcel of our society, and that it's high time the Namibian Constitution reflects that. The judge also said that same-sex relationships are globally recognized, and that's why these relationships should also become accepted in Namibia. So what the High Court basically said, they encouraged the Supreme Court to overturn this ruling because our Constitution does celebrate Namibia's diversity, does celebrate diversity of culture, diversity of sexuality too. And because Namibia comes from a time from an apartheid background, and it was founded on a history where unreasonable, irrational discrimination was basically the status quo and the order of the day. Now we've continued to see that. We continue to see how minority groups are being targeted by those in power. So if we come from a history of discrimination like apartheid, we should continue to build a democratic, independent country where people's fundamental rights, human rights, civil rights aren't being denied and infringed. So the Frank case has no place in a born-free Namibia, and that is why we are confident that once this case goes to appeal, the Constitution and the promise of equality that Namibia is founded on will prevail.
Is that confidence also based on the fact that we've seen, LGBTQI community in Namibia come more to prominence over the last, should I say, couple of years? I mean, just last year, the community had its first Pride March as well. So we're seeing a shift, slowly but surely. Is that why you're confident of this?
Yes, so last year it's in Namibia, it's actually coined the year of LGBTQ liberation fight, because last year we had more than 9 court cases against the Ministry of Home Affairs alone. And we've seen the Ministry of Home Affairs abuse public office at the expense of taxpayer funds to target LGBTQ persons by separating twins, creating stateless children just because their parents are in same-sex relationships. So last year, many Namibians came together to basically find the biggest civil rights movement since independence, because we are tired of what's called state-sanctioned homophobia in Namibia. We are tired of these public officials, members of parliament, people who are elected to represent and serve us and uphold our constitutional values, step on the Constitution. Let's remember that many of these political leaders and these ministers who are upholding state-sanctioned homophobic policies are people that wrote the Constitution. These are what's called, our liberators, our freedom fighters. But now they are in Parliament, stepping on the Constitution, walking back on the words that they enshrined in the preamble that basically protects our rights as inalienable rights. So it's very hypocritical to see the framers of our Constitution walk back on the words simply because LGBTQ persons are becoming to be afforded with the rights that was enshrined in the Constitution. So last year's movement definitely has propelled momentum for the LGBTQ community, because coming out, showing up, becoming more visible as a community brings us representation in Namibian society, and representation matters. Lastly, I'll also say that a vast majority of Namibians support LGBTQ civil rights. An ombudsman study in 2013 2013 showed that 73% of Namibians believe and support in LGBTQ civil and human rights. So it's not society that's homophobic, it's basically the state that's supporting state-sanctioned homophobic policies. But I believe that Namibians will hold them to account and that our constitution will prevail, and that the Frank case was 20 years ago. This is a new Namibia. LGBTQ rights are the civil rights issue of our generation, and the youth have begun to stand up and hold systems of power to account.
Yeah, small wins, and that's exactly what's needed in this situation. What has, though, the dismissal, just speaking of the case, the dismissal of the application, how's that been received? I mean, you did mention up front that you are celebrating, and just talk to me about that victory with children now being afforded citizenship, children of spouses who are in same-sex marriages.
Yes, so basically part of those 9 court cases that has come from last year, the LGBTQ court cases against the Ministry of Home Affairs. In one such case, a same-sex couple who had a child born through surrogacy in South Africa are challenging the government to recognize their child as a Namibian citizen by descent, which is what the Constitution does recognize. We won that case also in the High Court, but the government is appealing that now to the Supreme Court as well. So the Supreme Court is going to be hearing about 3 cases that are LGBTQ focused. And while we did have these wins that recognize LGBTQ persons and their children as a family, it's still basically in the gray zone because it still has to be heard and a verdict still has to be delivered by the Supreme Court. But we do, like I've mentioned, we do believe that it's high time the Supreme Court recognizes LGBTQ rights and overturns the rulings of 20 years ago that basically gives the ministries and the government a license to discriminate or a reason to discriminate against LGBTQ persons. But we do believe in a positive outcome with these appeals at the Supreme Court and that the Constitution will prevail.
Yeah, I mean, it's mind-boggling that you can discriminate against an entire grouping of people simply based on their sexual orientation. The fight goes on. What is next in this appeal, and how are you hoping that will go?
Definitely. So because the High Court's verdict was so strong in recognizing LGBTQ rights and recognizing our right to equality under Article 10, the High Court basically wrote our appeal notice for us. They strongly came out in support of LGBTQ rights. They actually encouraged and instructed the Supreme Court to overrule their verdict, but they can't overrule the verdict because of the nature of principles of stare decisis, because they are a lower court than the Supreme Court. So we have a strong grounds to appeal this verdict, and we do believe that the Supreme Court will overturn their verdict as well. So as I mentioned, the same-sex marriage, the recognition of same-sex marriage case is at the Supreme Court, and we just need to get a hearing date and a verdict date. But we are confident that it will be a good outcome.
All the best for you for that. That's Namibia Equal Rights Movement Organization co-founder Omar van Reen, and I really do appreciate the time you've taken to chat to us this morning.